Hello, my name is David Turner and this is episode 11 of the Lunar Poetry Podcast, and today I'm joined by Sarah Lester and Nathan Penlington. Hello, you two.
Hello.
And this episode is going to be based on collaboration between artists, but obviously more specifically today between writers, and I'm going to let my two guests introduce them, and we'll start with Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the writers of an attempt at exhausting a place in London. I used to work as the assistant editor on a online magazine called the Journal of Wild Culture, and I work as a researcher at UCL University.
Cheers. And Nathan?
Hello, I am Nathan Penlington. I am a writer and a performer, and my history is a little bit different than Sarah's. I have been writing and performing within the poetry world for about 20 years now, I think it is, since I first moved to London. So I've got a lot of background in performance poetry, but also in performing magic, oddly. And I've combined my love of literature and performance in my last few projects. My last project was a live interactive documentary based on Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Thank you very much. And we also have another guest, which is Cook, Sarah and Nathan's cat. And I only say that because, is it she?
It's a she. She will make herself known.
She may well
much,
jump up and knock the microphone over or something, and just so you know, it's not me. And yeah, so as Sarah mentioned there, they've recently released a book in collaboration with each other, and it's called An Attempt at Exhausting a Place in London. And I'm going to use the word recreation, even though it's not, and we will explain as to why it's not a complete recreation, but of George Perec's book An Attempt at Exhausting a Place in Paris, which was written in 1974. That's 40 years on from the original book. Actually, Nathan, maybe if you explain just very briefly what you did, the process of writing the book, but very briefly, and then it'll be easier to get into the questions.
Okay, so the book chronicles a weekend in Hackney, and it's based on George Perec's book 40 years earlier, in 1974. He spent 3 days in a square in Paris documenting everything that happened. So we sort of tried the same experiment 40 years later, but with a slight twist in that both me and Sarah wrote our own separate accounts, so they run alongside each other and quite often pull the text and observations in different directions. And
I'm going to start with asking you both. Especially if you read the original by George Perec, it presents itself as a very solitary exercise to sit on your own and observe the world around you. Why did this idea present it to you as a collaboration? How did that come about?
Well, I've kind of been interested in experimental writing for a long time. I mean, it's one of my passions within the realm of literature, and yeah, the idea of sort of celebrating the anniversary of a kind of series of non-events was hugely appealing in my love of kind of absurdity. But I think in approaching it as a collaboration really transforms the nature of the text and the idea of observation and what that might mean. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the main impetus really for making it a collaboration between the two of us.
I think I just wanted to see if I'd do it as a kind of challenge, which I knew would spur me on, knowing that Nathan was doing it. So it's maybe more competitive in that I just wanted to put some time in and see what happened, with no real view to thinking, oh, this will be a book at the end, but just to think, okay, well, I want to spend some time, I enjoy writing, let's see what happens.
Yeah, it was there was no original aim that this would definitely be a book.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah, it was an exercise that you both wanted to carry out.
Yeah, it was an exercise, and it would have ended up being a private homage in a sense. We had no real idea if the writing was good enough until we kind of brought the two pieces of writing together and kind of sort of set it out and started sort of looking at it in detail, really.
I wanted to ask, you've sort of answered that question slightly already, but was it difficult to make mundane observations without being aware of somebody reading it afterwards? Were you tempted to make it more interesting, the text?
Yeah, I guess there's always a slight pressure to. It's more like as you're watching something happen or something unfold, you'll always have your own take on what that is, and there's never going to be some objective, dry way of writing about something. Everyone would always have their own input into what they're actually seeing, however mundane it might be. But I know I could have tried harder to be like, oh, this is going to be laugh out loud funny all the way through. So it was almost like a bit of tension between like, I'm still going to try and be honest to the situation that's happening, but then there's always going to be the odd little quip that you'll think of in your head and record that. But everything is as
I think
it happens.
I was surprised when I read the book, because I think I had an idea in my head that it was going to appear like a weather journal, you know, like very dry in that sense of just logging events at certain times. But you do, I suppose, if you're going to spend that much time in the cold on your own, your mind will wander to other things. And it's did you find yourself having to rein back a bit and not be too elaborate in the way you describe things?
I think this is fair to say. I think my account is more self-reflexive at times. And
I when I started reading Nathan's account, I got a bit annoyed that he'd put so much more of himself in it, because I was like, mine might seem almost more dry in comparison, because I tried to keep that distance, but then Nathan had put these more kind of poetic ruminations, and then I was like, oh, I didn't do that. I didn't think that was what we would.
Well, yeah, but there kind of wasn't really any sort of set rules as to how you would kind of approach the accounting of what went on, and I think it sort of takes over your idea of kind of your experience with him in writing and literature. I think sort of takes over with in that kind of documenting something. I suppose you can't really separate yourself out from the process of doing what you were going to do.
No, and it was interesting to see the subtle differences between the way you both recorded. I don't know if you agree, but Nathan's account seemed to you seem to speculate as to why people were doing what they were doing or where they were going, whereas Sarah was a bit more interested in just explaining in more detail what people looked like, whereas you seem to dream off a bit. And
I think Sarah's account, is definitely more detailed in ways that mine wasn't, and kind of reading back through, you can kind of see this.
How did you both decide on what you were going to be observing? So this practice essentially was to ignore the big things we would normally look at in life and focus on the mundane and the banal and the small details. But how, as artists, did you decide what was banal and what was mundane?
That is a very good question. So it started on the Friday with knowing that you've got 3 days ahead of you to do this, and I kind of started with the idea of trying to catalogue things in areas and groups of types of things that you might see, and that kind of quickly fell away, and you end up, I don't know, it's what your eye is drawn to, I guess, and then I guess that helps also then reflect the personality of who's written the piece, really. I think by day 2 I got fed up of cataloguing the buses.
Yeah, you comment on that, don't you?
Because you can't do it, and I think I was thinking I was sort of being distracted from the main task, but there is no main task, and that's kind of part of the joy of the experiment in a way.
But did you discuss beforehand what you would try and look at, or you just
with each other? No, I don't think we really did. I think we've been looking at Perec's version, and just I think there's something that he says about it's not about the buildings or the important things or things that would be recorded in the records, like civil documents of that town. It's things that would be transitory.
Well, he describes it as being the infra-ordinary, doesn't he? Like the stuff that just sort of permeates a space rather than...
Well, it's those moments that make up the majority of most people's lives. All of us spend a lot of time doing things that are essentially invisible. Like if you had to catalogue your life, you wouldn't talk about those tiny ordinary moments.
I wrote down a quote here and ridiculously didn't write down which of you said this.
Okay, this is
it's from the book, but no, it's more of a judgment on myself, but it's just relevant to this. But you wrote how it was hard to keep focused on the task and to persist with the acute observation of the ordinary, And did you find yourself losing track of what was ordinary?
Yeah, you got it sounds like it doesn't know.
Yeah, I did think it so very pretentious. It must be the right.
It's so pretentious. It's got to be. It's utterly hard to keep going in a way. I wrote everything by hand as well.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
And Sarah.
I used a laptop because I'm sensible and knew that would be quicker.
But in a way, for me, I thought that kind of I don't often write by hand anymore, and I think that really helped the process of it obviously slows you down, but then it kind of, I think it's something for me as a writer kind of really helped that.
But I felt inconspicuous by having a laptop because I think so many people sit there on a laptop. If I was there writing by hand, I'd have felt a bit out of place and maybe more self-conscious about doing the task.
Actually, was that an issue for you both as well, to hide as much as possible? Did you become self-conscious?
I felt creepy at various
because it's
times.
not a very nice thing to do, writing about people in that way. Is it like cataloguing buses and stuff? That's one thing, but I
felt, to start with, like I could be an undercover spy. This is really romantic and cool. And then I thought, no, I'm just like staring at people like a weirdo. And there's only one moment in the book, and there's a guy who does turn around and he looks at me, and I'm writing about him as I'm doing it. But then it's really nice because he just smiles, and then I record that, and I'm like, oh, well, he helped me finish that sentence. So that's the only proper interaction I had, I think, which is kind of depressing.
Well, no, I think
didn't even bump into any friends. I'm like, I live here.
I mean, I saw a couple of people I know and kind of failed to recognise.
Yeah.
And then I think I said hello to the postman, which is also good. But I think there's a bit when we're actually in the square near a wedding taking place, and it was those moments I felt very self-conscious. There were a lot of people around who were kind of definitely doing something creepy. But
there's enough weirdos around. No one would.
That's the beauty of. That's why I love living in a place like this. Really.
Yeah. And that place is Hackney, by the way. I forgot to mention
this
earlier. So this all took place in the square outside Hackney Town Hall.
Yeah, it's just
beside Hackney Empire. So there's a lot going on.
It's a very busy area, but in a very ordinary, urban way. I think that's the best way to describe it.
And to avoid seeming horrendously London-centric, Hackney's in East London. People get really angry when you just say borough names of London.
Oh yeah,
East London.
So it's East London.
Which I understand. So Hackney and East London. Actually, now might be a good time for a reading and give more of an insight as to how the observations worked, and then we can carry on chatting. So we can start with Nathan.
This is a short section from the end of day 1, 24th of October 2014, 4:40 p.m. Location: middle of the square, sat on the stone wall. Weather: grey, darkening clouds, threatening rain. 17 degrees. The sound of a man playing the accordion outside the front of the Hackney Empire, fondly. Another man, mustachioed, in his 50s perhaps, is dancing on the corner of the square. Every now and then he raises his hands to the sky, either beckoning or questioning. Here I am, the most central position you can occupy in the square. There is a moderate calm here, away from the edges, the push of the bus stops. A man with a closed umbrella struts up and down, pigeon-like, in front of me, along the central aisle. On the steps of the town hall stand a very small wedding party. The bride and groom and 5 other people pose for a photograph. There is a huge compulsion to look for narrative, but square life is made up of purely transitory moments. The man with the umbrella suddenly raises his arm and shouts. The pigeons, scared by the sudden noise, flutter upward briefly and land again as the man with the umbrella hugs a woman he obviously loves. The stone wall I am sitting on is engraved with the number 88, now neatly coloured in by dark green moss. The middle of the square is rarely used in comparison with the edges. Brad Pitt, free for 6 months. The accordion player is adding a Frenchness to this most London of locations. Peachy finance. 3 schoolboys in red blazers eye up a group of girls from another school, blue and green blazers. One of the girls unzips a violin case, starts playing a kind of John Cale drone. The girl cycles past with what looks like, from a distance, a baguette. A baguette! An actual French reference in London 40 years later. As she gets closer, the baguette transforms into what is probably a roll of cooking foil. Foiled. I've moved to a bench on the north side of the square. To the right of me, the unbroken vista of the town hall. To my immediate right is another jail tree. At the bottom of the trunk is a plaque. Commandment number 1 of any civilised society is this: let people be different. Holocaust Memorial Day 2006. This weekend is about cataloguing difference and sameness, about the importance and insignificance of the ordinary. An exodus of work pass wearers. If she's one of those lazy pregnant women, the middle of the sentence lost to traffic. Do you understand? A woman says emphatically into her phone. 3 seagulls circle overhead. 2 of the trees in the square are covered in red berries. Fallen berries also fill the gaps in the paving. A leaf falls. Cars and buses have started to turn their headlamps on. The trees are bound in thick wire that bristles with small LED lights. The wire has become part of the trees, electronic branches that replaced leaves lost to winter with light. 30 heading north, 277 heading north, 55 heading south, 254 heading north, 254 heading north. A woman sits in the middle of the square where I was a moment ago, her back to the road, smoking. From experience, I know that she occupies the most peaceful area of the square, today at least.
Thank you. And very brave for choosing to read a section with the sentence blue and green blazers in it, because that's really hard to say.
It really is, yeah. There's quite a lot of tongue twisters in it.
You don't realise until you try and read it out. I want to talk now about the physical mechanical processes of writing this particular book, because I think the reason I wanted to talk about collaboration is that often it's discussed in a very sort of artistic way, and all that really matters is, people focus on the compromises that have to be made with artists, but I think people miss out on how difficult it is to tie in to different points of view. So if we just start with, so the whole process took 3 days in Hackney Square, and I'd just say that Sarah, you weren't involved on the first day, were you?
I just went into work that day, and yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable excuse, and it sort of highlights that most of this stuff is done in people's spare time.
If nothing else.
Well,
I wasn't committed enough to the project. I went off to work.
Yeah, what kind of artist are you? But I mean, it also highlights the ordinariness of the thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't regard it as a.
And like you said before, so you said earlier that Sarah, you turned up with a laptop, and Nathan, you were there with a notepad and pen. Could you just sort of briefly outline how the day would have been structured when you turned up, and how much relevance did George Perec's structure of his original exercise, did that influence?
Yeah, so I'd kind of looked at his original sort of timetable, and his timetable was purely arbitrary. I mean, if you read his original, it's based on how bored he gets, and he goes off and gets a glass of wine in a cafe and comes back.
Drinks a lot of brandy.
He does, he has a lot to drink. I mean, I had a lot of tea, but that was about it. So it was, the start and end of each day were roughly around the same time.
He sticks it out until he starts to refer to things, the headlights on the cars, things like that, and then the days get shorter as the weekend goes on.
It does get, the last day is barely.
So we stuck to his.
So ours got shorter as well.
I mean, it seems purely fitting, not only as a tribute, but as a kind of as a literary device in a way, that you're constrained by, kind of European constraint.
Yeah.
But,
and how important was it? Going back to this idea of whether you were recreating what George Perec did, or how do you feel? Were you trying to recreate it? Or?
I largely forgot about Perec when I was doing it, actually, I have to say. Yeah,
no, I think it was more of the idea of doing it on the anniversary and kind of framing the time scale. That was kind of about it, really. I mean, particularly as soon as Sarah sort of comes in on the second day, and then that kind of breaks that whole thing apart.
Was there a performance element to it, like carrying out the process?
Only in terms of once I got into one of the cafes, I was like, I need to get the best spot, and I got really kind of competitive about, well, my line of vision is really important. You've got to understand that. But then at 10:30 on a Saturday or Sunday, no one else is really around anyway. But then as it gets busier, you think, I really need to get a good table.
It's an interesting question, actually, because I think the second day I was, and the third day perhaps, I was conscious of trying to get the same spots sometimes, or different spots, or particularly trying to sit in different places in the square, or the same place at a different time.
Because I was just interested, like now looking back at the exercise, now you have the book, is there any regret that you didn't document the process?
No. Well, not for me.
I mean, visually. Sorry, not obviously. You've documented with your right mind.
You mean
and
through
document,
photographs or something like that,
or just maybe even through a third party. You know, like.
No.
I think
I'm pleased that we didn't do that.
I think, I mean, particularly as we're kind of living in a time when we're flooded with photographs and videos.
Because I was thinking there's probably CCTV footage of that same 3 days. That I don't know.
So I'm not suggesting that it would have been a different or a better project had there been visual documentation. That more refers to my point about it being a performance. Yeah. And did you want to record the physical act of recreating an exercise? No,
I think particularly for this, the idea of removing the visual element is really important. I think, and this, I mean, it didn't start out as an idea. It would definitely be a book, and I suppose that helps the idea of whether you document something or not. But even if we'd sort of really thought about it, and yes, this was going to be a book, I don't think I still wouldn't have wanted to have sort of photographed where we were or the locations. I mean, it's documented purely through text, and I think that really helps with the.
But not purely through text, because we've got illustrations.
Well, that's
another sort of I don't know what you'd call it, transcription in a very different way.
Because we were really cautious that some of the we made a call out for artists and illustrators, and then we thought if someone did just photograph the square, how that would seem to betray the project and what we were doing, to have a very literal photo of just the town square. And it would seem, it would be that risk of dryness. I
suppose if you just offered up a photograph to an audience, that's allowing them to choose what's mundane, isn't it? And it sort of goes against the whole point of it. You as artists and observers are taking it upon yourself to tell people what
the act of writing translates it into something else, and from a very personal point of view, I guess. And you're making the incredibly ordinary become important through that act. I think taking a photo will still be ordinary.
If you're a very skilled photographer, you can, like say Martin Parr, someone who's going to put their own.
I mean, it would be interesting to get someone like Martin Parr to document over 3 days and kind of like really take thousands of photographs, but I just don't think you would get.
No, and I think that would be distracting from what the point of the project was anyway. That's it. I didn't mean images as document. No, but I mean we're agreeing. But the reason I ask, also, as Sarah just mentioned, the book is illustrated, and maybe you could explain a bit about how that came about and why you chose to have any form of visual illustration.
Because we spent so much time in the square, we started thinking, well, there's so many other artists and people around who also live in this place, and we wanted to get their take on it. And then we just had the idea of putting up some ads in newsagents' windows or in some of the bars that are in the area, and put a call out for artists. And
it was a pretty vague call out as well. I think we were quite conscious not to put too much in it. So.
And did were people just responding to your brief, or did any of the artists have the text to respond to as well?
No, so the advert just said 100 signs in the newsagent next to like the sweet massage and man in van, and so it was 100 messages that said artists wanted to illustrate book on Hackney, and then an email address. So people had emailed, and it was kind of, we wanted to kind of engage with people who perhaps observe more of their environment in a way. It could be so easy just to go through like social media and find artists that way. I think it's better to try and find people who kind of paying attention really. I once emailed, we'd said we were looking for artwork that reflects the kind of small interactions that happen in the square. So that's how people sent back the work back to us, and we're amazed really by the sort of quality and the work that was sent back to us. But yeah, like Sarah said, we were conscious of kind of trying to avoid photographers in a literal sense.
I've got a couple of questions now which may not really be of much interest to people, but I bought the microphone, so I'm going to ask them anyway.
Go on.
It's my podcast, right? So I don't.
You can ask anything you want.
Exactly.
Well, what can we do?
Yeah. No, it's about the editing process, the physical editing process. How did you keep your overlapping observations. So, just a brief explanation about the layout of the book. When you are both observing the square, there are alternate pages with your different observations. But you seem to have spent a lot of time in the layout. You're trying to keep your observations in chronological order, and it seems. How did you do that physically? Because it seems like a nightmare. If you've handwritten yours and you've typed yours.
Yeah. So I mean, once we'd finished sort of writing it, Sarah sent me her stuff over to look at, as and I was like, this is really good, and then spent ages typing mine up. Laboriously typing, like, what the hell did I write this out by hand for? So once we'd had the kind of two documents and realised that there was something interesting here, kind of it was about trying to juggle it through word programs just to see. And I guess that comes from my sort of background in poetry, really, and space on the page. I mean, I had a collection out quite a few years ago that was graphic poetry, where the form of the poem graphically was the poem, or the content of the poem at the same time. So that's kind of something that's engraved.
Did you have anyone advising or helping with the graphic layout of the book?
So yeah, once we'd got Clive Burney involved at Burney and I Books, he was involved then with the layout, and that kind of became a conversation between the three of us, really.
Yeah, so that was a three-way conversation, and not just between the two of you. And the second question, which I'm sure no one will ever care about, is to indicate who is writing which section. Your names are very faintly printed in the corners. And whose fault was that?
Yeah, is it? I mean, this is a good point. Is it a fault or is it a good thing?
Well, no, that was
it's so ridiculously faint, but we've decided we like it.
No, because
we did get a version, a PDF, to kind of check for before it went to print, and it was really quite more darker on that version, more prominent on that version. Maybe we should lessen that down a bit, but they took that a bit too literally, I think.
But in a way, it's kind of, I quite like the semi anonymity of that, and that you I think you're aware as you read it that who's written what, but it allows you to kind of move between the pages, perhaps. Read across, you read down.
It does allow you to read the book in different ways, doesn't it? You've got the chart. You could go through read in one go Sarah's account, and similarly with yours. I really like the fact that the names are there but very faint.
Yeah, no.
My main question was about whether it was a happy accident, or whether, because the question arises, if you're going to put the names in very faintly, why put them there at all? If you're going to have an indication as to who wrote what, it's just
you've got to admit that it would be far more confusing to not have even the slightest clue that they're different.
I really
accounts.
like confusing people, though.
Do you?
I would happily, deliberately make a book as difficult to read as possible.
I think there's a danger though with anything that's experimental in terms of literature, or whatever you want to call it, is to kind of make it too difficult. Yeah. And I think with a lot of work that I've done, I'm attracted to experimental. I'm also attracted to kind of more popular forms, and trying to meet the middle ground is always. Yeah. I think you have to make some kind of allowances for making some things easy for readers. I think.
And Sarah asked you earlier about whether there was a temptation to make your writing interesting or funny with a view to it being read at some point. When it was becoming when you knew it would be a book or a manuscript of some sort. In the editing process, was there a temptation to polish things up?
Totally, yeah. Nathan had to really hold me back on that, because I was so ready to rewrite the whole thing and be like, someone's actually going to publish my work. And I was totally had a different opinion on everything that I'd done. I was like, I can't have that in a book. I want to polish it all up. And then Nathan, because he's so much more used to having these kind of rules that he'd impose on making his own arts, then I thought, I've got to stick with it, and literally tweaked one or two things just for making sense of stuff maybe, but not to change the meaning. So we were really quite, it was hard, but we were pretty faithful to the process, because once you start changing one or two things to be like, I'm going to make that sound wittier, then you're going to kind of jeopardize the whole process and what you what you set out to do.
I suppose, and
So-
in parts, it's important that the text is as bland as what you're looking at, isn't it? You know,
I mean,
that's
if it's a list of buses,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
get a list of buses.
But then saying that, I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves, because once or twice I was like laughing at my own stuff, going, I think this is all right, and I was even surprised.
And you're okay
I
with
know.
admitting that on record?
Well, Nathan, I should have said Nathan's. Like,
yeah, if you're more gracious, like, I laughed out loud at some of yours. No, I laughed out loud at my own things.
No, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, yeah.
Is what I mean.
I think that's a fair. I think that's a fair comment. But it's. I think when you set out with something to do just because you're going to do it, then when you're surprised at it, I think that can only be a good thing.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I don't think you'd get your work out there. I think that helps with kicking it over the line.
I think
the area, really.
framing it as more of an experiment took some of the fear away of like, oh, this isn't my best writing, because it was a fairly quick turnaround in terms of the process. Yeah, we put some time in with editing process and that actually sitting there for 2 or 3 days in Nathan's case, but yeah, it's not the same as sitting and writing an article or something where you're like, I'm actually trying to get something across that's meaningful. It's not
but it's interesting, isn't it, how sometimes a very strict framework can allow you to be freer, because it takes the pressure of you being it's I always find it surprising and quite pleasant that creative people are quite happy when the obligation to be creative is taken away.
Yeah, because you can't make up the things that you're seeing.
It's interesting you say that, because I saw Darren Haymond, from the band Hefner.
Yeah.
I heard him speak the other day at Queen Mary's. He's talking about how he's got these concept albums. One of them's about the English Civil Wars and how he'd been using these very kind of strict rules to create these albums more recently. And then he started saying he finds it really strange that the concept album is still seen as a bit of an anomaly, and that writing 10 random songs about someone's life is like the main form, and everyone thinks that's great and commendable. And he's like, it's great that you can have a strict framework. They're still completely personal albums that I'm making, even though I'm writing about something that happened in the 17th century. And I totally I got that, and I think he's great.
I think the idea of sort of the scaffold that might sort of hides within the work is really important. Like, you don't need to know, as a reader, you don't always need to know the constraints behind someone's creative process, but
you can definitely tell that you've both tried to be creative in your own way within that framework, because it, like I said, it wasn't just an observation log, it wasn't a list of things that happened. You did either speculate or question in different ways, and it was, you were trying to express in your own voice what had happened. That was why it's so nice to have the two views next to each other, rather than with Perec's single-minded, quite bored view of, and quite clearly seems really disappointed that he's gone through with actually doing it.
But I almost wonder if maybe we were spurring each other on, knowing that the other person was out there. Not in it. I was trying to joke. I was joking when I said it was a competitive thing for me, but maybe that's what kept us going a little bit more. Because the odd time I'm like, oh, I can see Nathan in the square, and you're always conscious that other person is there doing the same thing, and you want your account to be perhaps that bit better because they're going to read it.
Have either of you worked in collaboration with creative projects before?
My last project, the live interactive documentary, was, I suppose, my first big collaboration with, that was with 3 filmmakers who were very much part of that process of making this stupidly elaborate sort of choose your own adventure narrative come together. So that was my first big collaborative project.
I can't think of any big collaborations.
No, it's not. It's just for the audience. So I don't know whether it's a new thing or. But
it's new to me.
How difficult was it to give up control on a project like this? I mean, maybe it's a bit difficult because it wasn't ever intended to be a book, and it was just an exercise. But maybe easier to go into. Was the editing process more difficult because then it was becoming a?
I think it wasn't really sort of difficult in that sense. I guess it was. I mean, the times when you were like, "Oh no, I don't know about that line. Should I take it? Can I take it out? Can I add something to it?" And I think that's the convincing sometimes, that because it's so easy to kind of break some of the rules you've set yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it's like trying to stick to them is kind of the hard thing, isn't it? But apart from that, it was, I think, a pretty painless process, really.
Was it I suppose if you've not really done much collaborating, I was going to ask you if it's different because you're a couple, but if you've not really got much experience previously of working collaboratively, maybe you'd just be guessing anyway.
I have worked on a collaboration.
Oh, hang
I've
on.
just remembered.
Hold on.
Oh no, it's not quite a collaboration.
Oh, actually, that's a very good point. I was going to say, but I just can't get into it because it'll take too long. There's a very big difference between collaborative work and participatory work, where people join in, but it's because there's different levels. People say there's different levels of collaboration, and it, depending on how much control you give someone, there's a difference between letting them collaborate and letting them participate in your project, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. But what you did together seems like a true collaboration. That's what I mean.
The example I thought of was someone asked me if I'd write something for an exhibition, and it was about having 5 photographers. That it was an all-female exhibition with 5 female photographers and 5 female writers, and we were paired up, and I had to write something which was in response to this girl called Victoria Jenkins, her photos. So that's a very hands-off collaboration, but you're still trying to be faithful to what someone's created in the first place. So I mean, that's very different from what happened.
Yeah, I think that was kind of a...
But that was also quite a nice restriction in terms of writing something and having to respond directly to something else.
I think we're going to take another reading from you, Sarah, and then we'll get on to talking about sort of what it is to be an observer as a writer.
October 25th, 2014, 12:12 p.m. Stage 3, Hackney Empire Cafe. Still grey, but with black clouds forming, becoming overcast. Better view, more expansive without sections of wall blocking vision, panoramic. A woman scoots by on an electronic mobility scooter. Again, she seems faster than the cars. People wearing yellow raincoats, too many to count. A girl holding hands with her mum, clutching something with silver and gold fringing that looks like it was made at school. A broken kite or a Halloween decoration that has gone wrong. She's not crying. She looks stoic in the face of disappointment. A girl, early 20s, oversized coat, shorts underneath, dark glasses. She's holding a bottle of water in the crook of her elbow. Borderline sporty, but with the dark coat and glasses she looks knowing and wise. A young man with curly hair, obviously hungover, but holding it together. 2 very old women, could be mother and daughter, or friends. They are both holding on to a shopping trolley as if it's an IV stand. A teenage boy in a tracksuit kicks at a pigeon. It flies off, but it is not frightened, more aloof. Another mobility scooter. This one is sturdier and is much slower than walking pace. The driver stores her walking stick in the boot. A young girl, pretty, with an I-Hot Hackney bag, blue duffel coat with the hood up. 2 couples walk by in opposite directions. One couple have matching beanies and are holding hands. The other pair are talking, around a metre apart from each other. Intense, animated gestures. A group of friends, 2 girls and a guy, walk by in a triangle formation. Pigeon kicker now has a friend, in a mustard-coloured tracksuit. An old man, grey hair, 2 wooden sticks, homeless, propels himself forward very slowly. One of his legs seems injured, or perhaps both. He looks like a stock character from a play. A goth couple walk by. The man seems pleased that he has a girlfriend. A woman, serious looking, holding 2 items of dry cleaning. A woman holding hands with a man. She's wearing heeled brown boots and a woolly hat with 2 pom-poms, so she looks like Minnie Mouse. 3 men that look like they drink craft beer, but not in an affected way. They just have beer bellies and are in their early 40s. They look like they were into music. A man saunters across the cobbled stretch of road in front of the theatre with his hands in his pockets. Beige trousers, brown suede boots, blonde tousled hair and tan. He walks with confident strides, like a top-tier Abercrombie and Fitch model.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're going to talk a bit about what it is to observe and why bother. The way you took on this project, was it a criticism of other writers and the way they look? And when I say other writers, I mean you as yourselves, but is it a general criticism that we don't look properly as writers in some way?
I think as people
that
we don't look properly. I don't think it was meant to be anything specific to do with writers as such, but I just think, myself included, I was amazed how little I'd actually observed about the area next to where I live, and I've lived for 4 years.
Yeah, I just think particularly in an urban environment, you just don't have the time or the mental capacity to spend that long really looking and observing things. And I guess London particularly, you tune out quite a lot of that stuff, otherwise you would probably drive yourself quite mad on a daily basis.
And do you think in general we can be guilty of believing that we just know places? You're so used to, you just stop
hugely.
looking, don't you? And
yeah, but it's the little interactions with people that really, I think, do reveal a lot more and make sort of places more human in a way, because you can just get used to going, that's such a terrible place, or I like that place, but not really have a feeling why. Maybe subconsciously you're picking up some of these kind of tiny interactions. But the stuff I liked about doing this was how brilliant and beautiful and funny some of these tiny moments are.
I was a bit shocked at how judgmental I am, and even in that thing that I just read out, I'm saying how pretty people are, and I'm making these judgments, and even saying, an Indian family wearing sari, and I'm like, well, they might be Pakistani, and I'm just like making these judgments all the time, which is then quite exposing if you've got it down on paper, and then you think, God, people are going to think I'm making all these, assumptions but that everyone has got their interpretation of what they see, but sometimes it's not always what you want it to be.
I was thinking as well that maybe the biggest challenge when collaborating in a way like this, when you're sort of trying to focus very acutely on small details, is that you can never be sure that the other person's looking at the same things. Would you agree with that? Was that a challenge at all, or was it something to embrace and highlight?
I think in this it was about highlighting and embracing that kind of divergence between the two of us, really. We'd set out so that Sarah was in different locations at different times, that we took up different places, and then we would kind of both be in a certain place. We'd agree to kind of meet in a certain place at a certain time, and then to kind of work from there. So
I think that's also when we were saying, Perec was just sat there and he was getting more and more frustrated. I think having those we'll do this session and it'll be like 2.5 hours, and I think actually having those points throughout the day is probably what allowed us to actually keep to the task.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And what about the language that you used in order to describe the scenes? Did that change? I was thinking, I've got a quote from Perec about applying the law of communicating vessels to buses, in that because you're looking at small details, he describes buses as being full or empty, or did the way you describe things with your writing, did that change slightly?
Did it change over the process?
Well, yeah, or over the process, or just in general from how you would normally write?
I think I was more aware of types of ways to describe something.
Yeah.
So whether it's in sort of speed or colour, or whether it's
I guess you're reading people's body language and the way they're moving themselves, because that's pretty much, you've only got clothes to go on apart from how they're actually kind of traversing the space. So you do start to think, okay, well, how can I give this more life, and how can I give this person a bit more kind of validity? And
you were saying just now that you found yourself being quite judgmental, and I suppose that comes from superficiality, but how else do you record what you see? Because you don't
I felt so bad reading out that line where it says there's a goth couple and he looks pleased with himself that he's a girlfriend. I'm like, that's so horrible. It might not even be his girlfriend.
But the thing is, that might be true though. I mean,
Yeah.
But also, I guess this comes back to knowing, being with the writer's mind on, you know, and that I think you're also aware that even if it was just me going to read that later, then you've got an eye for that at the same time. I mean, I'm trying to kind of justify your bigotry.
Thanks, Nick.
No, but I mean, there is that tension, isn't there? I think
yeah.
as soon as you start writing and it's a thing, is that the same way you would actually view something? Probably yes, but you're kind of perhaps exaggerating slightly.
And if you're not going to make a simple log of the 254 heading north to 254 heading north to 254 heading north, and you're going to try and describe them in slightly different ways, then it's a challenge. And then I suppose that's what Perec's saying. They're no longer buses, but they're vessels. I suppose you notice things more like that. And there's only so many times you can say that a woman walks from right to left.
I mean, you could. Yeah, if you'd reduced it down to the way someone. The direction.
Yes.
I mean, there is a difference in language in that I think you said this at some point, that I tend to use more words like north and south.
I don't even know which way north is.
So there was a kind of in terms
you
of
did
space.
When I read your accounts, Nathan, it seemed like you were sitting there with an Ordnance Survey map. With the one with the compass built into it, because you were very aware of.
But I think that's generally how that's part of my brain anyway. But then I was also aware that, how would you begin with it if it's an empty canvas? How do you start? I think that's the start of the first day. Okay, how do you log?
You lay out geographically the square, don't you?
So it's I'm also kind of, I suppose, with the hypothetical reader in mind. How do you log the square so that when you read it, you might.
But perhaps that's a difference born of the fact that Sarah, you weren't involved in the first day. In the manuscript, you're not obligated to describe.
I wasn't setting the scene.
Yeah, Nathan's already set the scene.
So you didn't. But you hadn't read any of that.
I asked if I could read Nathan's first day, and he was quite strict that I shouldn't, which I'm glad about now. Yeah.
But even subconsciously, you're entering a project, and it's already started, and you're. I suppose you don't feel an obligation to explain where you are. Yeah,
and there's less reflexivity. I don't have those.
I mean, it's impossible to know, but you may have, even on the first day, not felt obligated to set the scene in any way. That's just an interesting difference between the way both of you look at being in a place, I suppose.
Yeah, and there is a difference in the language in that.
Did the way you observe change over the time that you spent in the square? Did you reprioritise what you were focusing on in any way, or because I know you Nathan, you stopped, a very simple thing. You stopped looking at the buses. At one point, you physically turned your back to the main street.
I'm not writing bus numbers down anymore.
I think it became almost easier actually because you can kind of compare. Well, I only did 2 days, but on the Sunday I was like, there's a different kind of feeling, or there's a more casualness, or people are more hungover, or certain things that you kind of think, well, I've got something to actually compare today with because I had yesterday. So it became a bit more rewarding in terms of it feeling like a fuller piece.
I think when you see the same people you might have seen earlier on.
I love that. When someone had come in and, I saw them half an hour ago and they're just walking the opposite direction, looking exactly the same, or they're carrying a bag now, and you think, it's actually absurd sometimes that someone might kind of be crossing over the square, come back, go back another direction, and it just makes everyone look like their lives are a bit meaningless because they're going around in these circles.
It did seem like there were a couple of characters that spend their whole working day pottering about the square in some ways. Delivery drivers seem to keep coming back to, that was obviously their route and their patch, so they're back and forwards all the time.
And obviously street cleaners, all that kind of thing. You get very much that involved in that kind of life.
And I suppose unless you're being quite strict with yourself and sitting yourself down in one spot, those are the things you miss in life, the repetitiveness. Because London can seem quite a random. Yeah. Well, any big city seems completely random because you don't spend enough time to notice that there are any regulars or any sort of locals.
Yeah.
And I think you can, especially in Hackney and where I live at Elephant and Castle, it's easy to forget really what they are is just villages within a city, and people live locally and their whole lives revolve around the square in the same way Elephant and Castle people's lives revolve around the shopping centre or on the roundabout.
Don't you have I can't remember what day it is, but there's a homeless person who's doing the rounds and they go at the same time to look at the bins, and there's certain routes that That's just one example. There's other ones.
There's a sort of elderly woman appears sort of towards the end of the morning on a sort of route of the bins, and then she appears again on the Saturday, sort of exactly at the same time, pretty much. And those are kind of things that we're, living in a city, you tune out. I mean,
and again, you speculate as to where she's come from. And does she have a route further outside the square? And that's an interesting thing to then, it's a natural thing, I think, to speculate, but it doesn't, at the same time, doesn't really fit in what you're, if you explain the initial idea, that wouldn't seem a very relevant point to make. Yeah. But it does in the context of the whole book. It makes a lot of sense as to how that speculation would develop.
I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? You end up cataloguing your speculations as much as you do your observations, and that very much becomes a part of the life of the text, I think. One of the big differences, talking about language, between this account and Perec's 40 years ago is the amount of adverts and slogans and names, celebrities and brands, and you get hammered down with it. You know, I think buses get replaced with just these slogans like Brad Pitt, and that is very much yes, there are adverts in Perec, or kind of a couple of slogans or the headlines in newspapers.
It does highlight how overwhelmed we are now with images and signs and stuff, because you both list a lot. The buses going past with billboard, signs on the side. You've got the Hackney Empire there, which is covered in posters and adverts for things. And then the bus stops as well with the adverts on.
It's the bombardment and the absurdity, I think, of some of the juxtapositions between what you're going to sold or try to be sold.
I think now we've sort of discussed a bit as well how your writing styles on this overlapped or differed. We'll take our final reading, which you're both going to, Nathan and Sarah are both going to read in tandem.
So this is a part from towards the end of day 2, I think.
There's a kid in front of me with a pink and purple patterned plaster over her right eye. She wears glasses over it. She takes large jumps across the square, seems unhindered by her sight-based issues.
A white stretch limousine pulls awkwardly in front of the town hall.
A huge white Ford Excursion limousine truck pulls up in front of the town hall, the faint sound of hip-hop music playing inside.
"Oh my days," shouts a small boy pointing at the car. The limousine reverses twice, trying to avoid the bollards. It ends up facing backwards in front of the steps. "You disappeared," a man in shade says to a sneezing girl. The driver of the limousine is listening to drum and bass. Kids gather expectantly on the steps, waiting for a celebrity to emerge from the back of the car. A people carrier pulls up in front of the limousine, its bonnet tied with ribbon. 4 smartly dressed young guys pile out, ties knotted with large knots, pose for photographs next to the limousine.
A people carrier with white ribbon and a bow on its front pulls up, so it is nose to nose with the limo truck. 2 teenage boys, ushers, have their photos taken in front of the limo. An older guy joins them after a few minutes and puts an arm over each of their shoulders. They are all laughing, squawking, but then go back to pose very seriously each time there is a new photo.
A group of girls dressed in blue, elaborately ruffled dresses wait their turn for limo photos.
Some girls appear in elaborate blue flamenco-style dresses. The girls have their photos taken separately, at the furthest away end of the limo. The boys are looking over, then down at the floor.
One of the excited kids on the steps is wearing a pink eye patch beneath her glasses.
A man in a flat cap, holding hands with a small boy in a flat cap, holding hands with an even smaller boy in a flat cap.
The arrival of 2 more people carriers in a Mercedes, kissing, hugs, handshakes, a palpable excitement.
A man pushes another man in a wheelchair. They stop under the shade of a lime tree. The pusher stands sideways on with his hand on his hip, looking at the limo truck for a long pause.
Hats and headdresses.
The longer he stands there, the less sure I am that it is a lime tree.
The father of the bride is wearing a white silk suit, a blue waistcoat and shades.
A young girl, around 6, in a tutu, carefully carrying a single blue flower.
The pigeons have disappeared again, earlier than yesterday.
A man shakes her by the hand, and she looks pleased. Then he bends over to shake every other child by the hand as they come up the steps.
It's the first time today I've felt warmth from the sun.
A young boy running along the pavement near Mare Street. He's eating a banana and running at the same time.
A guy carrying a ghetto blaster crosses the square from the gym to stage 3, power cord and plug dangling.
A young usher with a cool, sharp haircut struggles to fasten the bracelet around one of the bridesmaids' wrists.
The girls are taking selfies on the stairs, practiced pouts and rehearsed head angles.
Someone notices and squeals, "Oh, look, it's so sweet!"
My disappointment at missing the pigeons leaving for the second time turns out to be unnecessary. They are now all grouped together on the grass, pecking furiously.
Young boy, who can only be 3 at the most, is wearing a 3-piece suit. A teenage bridesmaid tries to take a selfie with the boy, but he won't stay still for long enough. She sighs and rolls her eyes. He runs off to shake hands with the handshaker again.
A confusion of weddings. Another, more traditional wedding party gather at the top of the stairs. The elaborately dressed entourage posing for a photograph along the length of the limo, alternating boy-girl, 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 boy-girl. The driver pulls off slowly before the photo can be taken.
One of the youngest bridesmaids chases the 3-piece suit boy around the steps, shouting, "Jeremy, hold my hand," again and again. The more she shouts, the faster he runs away. He laughs as he escapes from her. The older bridesmaid, who wanted the photo with him, says, "Jeremy, please," as if she is about to cry.
A mother with 3 small children stops, asks me if the bride has gone in yet. The driver overhears and says she is still in the car.
The pastor shakes hands with a plainclothed wedding guest, who exclaims, "Oh my God." The girl who works at the gym on the other side of the square stops in her tracks as they are taking a group wedding photo. The boys and girls together now.
Another woman stops, also asks about the bride, adding, "I got married last month."
She's carrying a 12-pack of Chriselle toilet roll and shouts, "Where's the bride? I got married last month."
The wedding party all simultaneously, "Ah."
The group posing for the photo tell her that the bride is still in the limo. As they say this, the car door opens and there is an audible gasp.
The bride mounts the stairs, 2 tiny bridesmaids struggling to hold the train and walk stiffly. One of the children beside me shouts, "Holy macaroni! She's so pretty!"
So I was laughing there. I was going to try and hide it, but it was funny. There was one- I was hoping you were going to read Holy Macaroni because it really made me laugh when I read the book.
Who says holy macaroni?
Exactly, yeah.
It's like watching too much 70s Batman.
Yeah. And it's really nice that a kid would say it as well.
Yeah.
There's so many beautiful sort of moments and sort of tenderness around that is, as we said, is easy to miss.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Oh.
But I think we should talk again about other things, but we've covered enough of the book now. Lastly, I should ask if you have any websites or blogs you want to mention.
You can find out more about all sorts of stuff that I've been up to. It's nathanpenlington.com.
Yeah, and that link will be in I always point down and no one can see. It will be under this thing. Whatever you're listening to, it will be under our voices.
I've got a Tumblr, but it's not been
updated.
What is
this, 2008?
I know, and I think it's probably the last time I updated it as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to sort it out.
Sort it out.
Yeah, where can people find this Tumblr?
It's SL Leicester.
SL Leicester. Tumblr.com.
Tumblr.com.
Is that how they work?
No one knows.
It's been so long since I've...
That would be a link.
There will definitely be a link because we're not sure.
Because no one knows.
Us,
if you don't know it, then the rest of us have no chance.
And Nathan Penlington and Sarah Lester's book, An Attempt at Exhausting a Place in London, is available through Burning Eye Books. And you should check them out anyway because there's lots of really great stuff coming up that has already come out this year. And if I pull my finger out, this is going out before Christmas, so you can go over to Burning Eye Books and buy lots of books.
It would be a good Christmas present.
It would be an amazing Christmas present, yeah. And
locals.
Also, get the George Perec thing and do a comparison. It was really fascinating reading both. The translation hasn't been out that long, has it?
No,
it's English.
A couple of years.
Yeah, only a couple of years, but it's really good. And what's quite nice about it is sometimes if you read translations, you're not sure whether it's been translated very accurately, but because of the way he's writing, you can sort of remain fairly certain that it's been translated. You know, because
the translator's pretty committed as
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
because
yeah.
you can tell he's quite poetic himself
yeah,
and has got really involved with it.
Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.